Of the many challenges for the Harris campaign, there are two big false narratives about Vice President Kamala Harris being pushed by the anti-Trump universe and some in the mainstream media. One is that Donald Trump might be bad, but Harris won't tell the American people where she stands on the issues. The other is the both side-isms when it comes to violent rhetoric. We're going to break down both. We're going to start with the first false narrative, the but the issues crowd. Take a look at how MSNBC host of the 11th hour, Stephanie Ruhle, picked that argument apart on Friday night.
It's not too much to ask Kamala, say, are you for a Palestinian state if Hamas is going to run that state?
Okay.
Yes or no?
And let's say you don't like her answer. Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
No, I'm not.
Kamala
I just said I'm not going to vote for her.
Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have two choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
I don't know.
So it's unclear to me how there could be
Stephanie, the problem that a lot of people have with Kamala is we don't know her answer to anything, okay?
But you know his answer to everything.
And that's why I would never vote for him, and people shouldn't vote for him. But people also are expected to have some idea of what the program is of the person you're supposed to vote for. You're just not supposed to say, well, you have to vote for Y because X is this, that, and the other. Let's find out a little bit more. And I don't think it's a lot to ask her to sit down for a real interview as opposed to a puff piece in which she describes like her feelings of growing up in Oakland with nice lawns.
Then I would just say to that, when you move to Nirvana, give me your real estate broker's number and I'll be your next door neighbor. We don't live there.
That really is, and I like Brett, and I like Bill Maher said, he's a fan of what he reads, but I don't know what universe he lives in. He actually said, we don't know her answer to anything.
That's just
false.
Not true.
It's just false. He obviously hasn't been watching the campaign. And again, I know you're going to get into this, but compare what she said, and again, we can go through the issues with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Whether it's that rambling answer on child care, whether it was the nonsensical answers during the debate. And by the way, she wants to debate again. Donald Trump doesn't, because he doesn't talk about the issues. He can't talk about the issues. But again, there's this false equivalency from the anti-Trump crowd and also from the mainstream media.
She served as a senator, as a prosecutor, as an attorney general, and the vice president. She also has a record.
She has a record.
She has something you can compare to Trump. Last week, Los Angeles bureau chief for the New York Times, Todd Purdom, wrote an op-ed piece for the paper where he mocked Harris for telling her life story in an interview with a local TV station in Philadelphia. In response to a question about bringing down prices and making life more affordable for people, Purdom criticized Harris for talking about how she was a middle-class kid who grew up in a community of construction workers, nurses, and teachers who were very proud of their lawn, and how her mother saved to buy her family's first house and paid tribute to a neighbor who became a surrogate parent. She praised the beautiful character of the American people, and only then, after nearly 2 minutes, he writes, did Miss Harris outline her plan? But the vice president has been outlining her plan for weeks. Here are some examples.
When people work hard and have a dream of buying a home, we should give you the opportunity to be able to do that, which is why part of my plan is for first-time homeowners, buyers, to have a $25,000 down payment assistance to buy your first home. Because people just need to be able to get their foot in the door, and then you'll do the hard work. Part of my plan is to give startup small businesses a $50,000 tax deduction to start up their small business. Right now, it's $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. So that's part of my plan. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. We are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term.
All right. To Stephanie's point, you don't like the answer. Is that enough for you? What you need to do is compare that to direct questions Donald Trump has been asked on how he would handle various issues, including bringing down the cost of child care, water conservation in California, and threats to manufacturing in Michigan. Take a listen.
Can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make child care affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. You know, I was somebody, we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that, because look, child care is child care. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including child care. So you have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet. And you turn the faucet, and it takes 1 day to turn it. It's massive. It's as big as the wall of that building right there behind you. And you turn that, and all of that water goes aimlessly into the Pacific. And if they turned it back, all of that water would come right down here and right into Los Angeles. They wouldn't have to have people not use more than 30 gallons and 32 gallons. They want to do that, they're trying to do that. And you have so much water, and all those fields that are right now barren, the farmers would have all the water they needed. And you could revert water up into the hills where you have all the dead forests, where the forests are so brittle.
What do you see as the major threats to the future of Michigan manufacturing, auto working jobs, and what will you do to eliminate those threats, sir?
Okay, so I'll get into another little bit of a long answer, because when you say major threat, to me we have one really major threat that's called nuclear weapons. We have other countries that are hostile to us. They don't have to be hostile to us. I always say if you have a smart president, you'll never have a problem with China, Russia, or any of them, okay? I got along great with Putin. I got along great with President Xi. I got along great with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Everybody said, oh, you can't get along with him. He liked me. I got along great with him, and he has a lot of nuclear force. But you essentially have 5 countries, and you're going to have more. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have more. It's the single biggest threat to the world. Not only Michigan, to the world. And you're not going to care so much about making cars if that stuff starts happening.
He can't give a straight answer, and he devolves into nonsensical ramblings.
That raises a lot of questions.
That last question, that last answer about that rambling was about bringing manufacturing back to Michigan. The previous question, the big faucet, takes a day to turn. It's about water conservation. That first question, the long rambling question about child care, I mean, his answer, nonsensical. And that's always the case.
No answers.
And John Heilemann, Mika's going to get to the false equivalencies on violent rhetoric, which actually, believe it or not, is even worse. But something's happening out there where people are trying to flatten. And it's not just the anti-Trumpers. It's also people in the mainstream media. They're going, yes, Donald Trump, he's saying all of these crazy things. But did you see that? And there were two people this weekend with significant columns going, but did you see her answer to the local Philadelphia question, where she actually gave a 3-point answer And she talked about, $50,000 for startup small businesses. She talked about tax breaks, $25,000 tax breaks for first-time home buyers. She talked about a private investment partnership that would help create the building of 3 million new jobs. Those are specific answers to specific questions. And yet, two people, one at the Wall Street Journal, one at the New York Times, were like, did you hear her talking about her background and her middle class? And then they go, oh, yeah. She got to the policy questions later, but she never tells us anything about anything. Actually, that's just a lie. It's an absolute lie. And it also ignores what politicians have been doing for hundreds of years. When somebody asked me about jobs, I always started talking about my father at 40 years old, losing his job, being laid off at Lockheed. I talked about driving around the South, my entire family when I was 7 or 8, sitting in the backseat, my dad going to town, trying to find a job so he could support the family. And I kept going through that. And then I would end by saying, and that's why the greatest social policy is a job. And these are the 3 things we're going to do to create a job. Nobody mocked me. Nobody's ever mocked a politician for actually talking about their background and how it influences their policy. But now, as we get in the home stretch, the anti-Trumpers who just can't admit they are going to vote for a man who tried to overthrow American democracy, who did what they did on January 6th, they're desperately trying to create the permission structure so they can vote for a man who said he was going to terminate the Constitution, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs should be executed, that he told his staff members that Mike Pence deserved to be hanged. I could go down the list. I could do it for hours. Whose own lawyer said he could kill his political opponents using SEAL Team 6 and could not be prosecuted for it. Could not be prosecuted while he was in the White House. I could go down all of those lists, but they're looking at an interview where Kamala Harris gives the answer. They just say, oh, but she told her life story at the beginning of that Philadelphia interview like no politician has ever done. Did Ronald Reagan do that? Did Barack Obama? Yeah, damn straight they did. Did Bill Clinton tell stories? Yeah, damn straight they did. This is absolutely insane. The false equivalency. You see it from Brad Stevens. You see it at the Wall Street Journal. You see it at the New York Times. It's insane, the false equivalencies they are desperately pushing at the end of this campaign.
Well, and I just would add a couple things to that, Joe. One of which is that, a lot of these same writers and individuals have just within the last few weeks have commented about, that Kamala Harris is new. And we don't really know who she is. She needs to introduce herself to the American people. And so the notion that she's trying to strike a balance between discussing her positions on issues and continuing to talk about her biography to the American people is kind of not just, as you say, standard issue politics, but you could argue is even more essential for her. And that the people who are covering this understand that she is still, if you look at these polls, you see a lot of people still have questions. Who is this person? Where's she come from? How do you connect her biography, her political history to her current policy positions? That's telling the story of the full person is one of the top priorities that she has in her campaign. And one of the things that a lot of Americans want to hear from her is how do her values connect to her policy positions. I think that the other issue here, and I think it is fair for people to continue to ask questions that some of which she has not fully addressed about how she has made some policy changes, shifts of recent vintage from her positions in 2019, 2020 to her positions now, where she's moved from very progressive positions to more mainstream or more moderate positions that she has done in the course of becoming the nominee, and she has not fully accounted for. However, to get away from false equivalencies here, the string of flip-flops that Donald Trump has been guilty of in the last, I'm not talking about the fact that I think that Donald Trump's mental acuity here is declining precipitously and that we should hold him to account for that. And we should continue to talk about the ways in which he seems, just as Joe Biden did to a lot of people, mentally diminished, forgetful, deranged, losing his train of thought, incoherent, babbling, all of that. I think we have to focus on that. But we also just have to look at on policy what Trump has said on abortion, on a lot of economic policy issues, on some of these small business issues where he sees Harris stealing a march on him in terms of tax policy. He has been all over the map since she got in. And I think if you're going to talk about it, Harris is shifting positions. You also have to look at the place where Trump has flip-flopped or changed his positions without explanation over the course of the last weeks. And we're not doing that either. Or
He's
others are not doing
on
that.
abortion time after time after time. And again, seriously, you're going to talk about Kamala
Damage is
Harris
done.
on issues?
Yeah.
You're going to compare Kamala Harris on issues negatively to Donald Trump, not just this campaign, but over the past 9 years, being ill-equipped to answer any question. That he's asked a question about manufacturing and bringing it back to Michigan, and he talks about Kim Jong-un.
Nuclear war.
Nuclear war.
Okay.
He's talking about water conservation in California. He talks about a big faucet that takes an entire day to turn. And we all know about childcare. So seriously, do you have no shame? Do you really have no shame? Are you so desperate to not vote for Kamala Harris that you will actually twist and contort yourself so badly that you undermine decades of good work? Because that's what's happening right now. And we can see through you. This is like Romper Room. I don't have the mirror to hold up, but we see you. And we see what you're doing. And if you think that's bad, stick around for the 7 o'clock hour when Mika takes us through the lies and the false equivalencies about political violence in America. And there's even a Wall Street Journal writer who's accusing Democrats of killing Donald Trump. Oh, they put a question mark after it. But blaming Democrats for violent rhetoric, and never once mentioning, Dan Henninger, in your column, that Donald Trump inspired January 6th, that Donald Trump stared repeatedly, we learned, at the most violent moments on January 6th, instead of calling it off, that those riots where cops were brutalized because of Donald Trump, brutalized, and 4 later died, their families say, as a direct result of January 6th. Donald Trump called those people that the cops' families say are responsible for their deaths, and those people that beat and brutalized cops with American flags, he called them patriots. He said they're hostages. Has a January 6th choir. He told his legal counsel in the White House that maybe Mike Pence deserved lynching on the day of January the 6th. He said that Mark Milley should be executed for treason. He has used violent rhetoric repeatedly. You try to whitewash it and say it's the Democrats that are responsible for violent rhetoric because they say that Donald Trump may be a threat to American democracy. What do you call January the 6th? Is that a threat to American democracy? Is the intentional calling of a mob to go to Capitol Hill and say, I'll be with you, I'll be right back, I'll be with you, saying you have to be strong to stop Congress from the constitutional counting of the Electoral College, of those votes? Do you not call that a threat to democracy? Do you not call it a threat to democracy when Donald Trump says that he wants to execute the chairman of the Joint Chiefs for treason? Is that not a threat? Saying that your vice president deserves lynching, saying that to your legal counsel on January 6th, is that not a threat to democracy? Undermining Americans' confidence in voting? When you know, because the Wall Street Journal editorial page has been very clear. And I will say, have done the right thing repeatedly, calling out Donald Trump's lies when it comes to widespread election fraud. Is that not a threat to democracy? What exactly is a threat? What rises to the threat of democracy that we have ever seen in America since the Civil War, if what Donald Trump has done over the past 4 years does not? Please, give us the permission structure. I know you're desperate for a permission structure not to vote for Kamala Harris and to get people to vote for Donald Trump. Anti-Trumpism, it is something. If they gave out gold medals for it, you'd get it. You would. But please, tell me. And this is a question Bill Maher was asking this weekend correctly. If this is not a threat to American democracy, what we have seen over the past 4 years, and if that is somehow hate speech that is riling up violent rhetoric, please tell me. Define for me, what is a threat to American democracy? It's certainly not people going around speaking out against January the 6th. It's certainly not people going out speaking out about a presidential candidate and a former president saying he wants the chairman of the Joint Chiefs executed because he was insufficiently disloyal. Is it maybe you think it's Donald Trump's chief of staff who came out and said Donald Trump says he wishes his generals could be like Hitler's generals because they were sufficiently loyal. Of course, Donald Trump, not even knowing that the Desert Fox and several others tried to blow him up and kill him. I mean, it really is. This is insanity. You know, you often hear about silly season. We have officially entered silly season when people that I have read and people I have respected and others have read and respected all across the ideological spectrum are shaming themselves right now, are shaming themselves, trying to flatten this race out and trying to make Donald Trump seem normal next to Kamala Harris. And the question I cannot answer, and I guess they will have to answer and readers will have to answer themselves. What is it? Mm-hmm. What is it that they fear about Kamala Harris so much that they're willing to say, you know what? We've already had 4 years of Donald Trump and it turned out okay. Oh, did it really? Talk to the family of the cops who are dead today. Talk to the cops of the families who are dead because of January the 6th. Talk to all the federal judges that had to stand in the gap when Donald Trump was trying, listen to me, trying to undermine democracy and throw out a presidential election. Now, was anything I say there not true? Would you call that hate speech? Anything? Anything? No, I didn't think so. Could go on all day, and you know it. Stop embarrassing yourself.